The AFL believes that to advance the code and the interests of the wider game, that we cannot afford to put that push ahead into the Gold Coast on hold for another 12 months.
Relocation and merger, terms not unfamiliar to North Melbourne. 2007, definitely not the first time the club had faced its mortality.
The financial bottom line is as important at the end of the year as where you finished on the ladder. But you know what? Nobody goes back through the years and talks about the great balance sheet of 2000 and blah. We talk about, you know, the great games and the great wins and the comebacks and all of those things. If you don't get the hard emotion of footy, you don't get it. If you do get it, it's incredibly powerful. The AFL is as powerful as it is, as much as anything, because of the heart connection that so many people have with it, and it forgets that at its peril.
Desperate to secure its future and grow its supporter base, North innovated and became one of the first clubs to sell home games interstate. From 1999 through to 2002, the Roos played games at the SCG in Sydney and then did a similar deal to play in Canberra until 2006. In 2007, its home away from home was the Gold Coast, with a deal to play 3 games a year at Carrara's Casale Stadium. Financially, the plan was solid, but it came at a cost of a very different kind. Members became disenfranchised as a result of seeing less games in Victoria, and the club's brand became diluted to the point of being irrelevant. Pressure was mounting on the underperforming Victorian clubs, and in particular, the heat was on North Melbourne.
The conversations were always around, can we actually survive?
North were paddling a bit, significant debt, I guess making losses, and there wasn't a clear leadership mandate about where their growth was going to be. Unlike, say, the Bulldogs, there wasn't a geographic footprint that they owned. So at the time, there was some North people as well, I thought, that were looking for a future for the club. We wanted to have a club and a presence on the Gold Coast, and so a conversation started.
I think North was the perfect target for the AFL to make North Melbourne their go-to club for that expansion reason. Once they made their mind up, and as you know, when Andrew Demetriou made his mind up, nothing was going to change.
Not long after talk started, the AFL landed its first blow with a Godfather-type offer to move the club to Queensland.
Look, the main thing I remember is how divided the club was. There were periods when you picked up the paper every day and another famous past North Melbourne champion or famous past administrator was coming out and taking a position on what North should do.
I think for the good of the game, it would be the best if North Melbourne went north. I'd hate to see it go. I think they're taking a risk of not being here in 10 years' time if they stay in Melbourne.
After retiring from football at the end of the 2007 season, club legend Glenn Archer was looking for a well-earned break. But instead, he was thrust into the middle of an explosive power play for control of North Melbourne.
Mark Brayshaw gave me a call one day and said, Andrew Demetriou wants to see you, have a chat with you, which I found a little bit strange because I was just a retired player at the time.
I still remember Glenn, who by then was just probably the most revered and loved figure at North Melbourne, the Shinboner of the century, being called in to Andrew Demetriou's office, and Andrew actually trying to railroad him into bringing him round to his way of thinking, and Glenn just not taking it well at all.
I walked out of that meeting and I thought, why is he chatting to me? I'm a past player, I wasn't on the board or anything like that. But because I just retired, I think he looked at me as someone that was popular in the club and maybe if you got me on board, I might be able to convince some of the members and supporters that, we've got to move.
If you could get Glenn Archer on board and get Glenn Archer's support for the proposal, it would have made it a lot easier for perhaps members to swallow.
And he was explaining to me that basically, I've looked through everything, your club is buggered. There's no way out of this. You've got to go.
Glenn said to Andrew, listen, but pretty much give us one more roll of the dice. If we don't hit the required targets, I will endorse a trip to the Gold Coast.
I was sort of begging to him that, give us 12 months, let's have one last crack at it, and if it doesn't work, I'll be the first one to put my hand up and I'll go to the members or supporters and say, we've got to go.
Archer's proposal for a year-long delay was flatly rejected by the AFL.
I think it went down really badly. I remember hearing about a very tense meeting between the two, and that was the way Andrew was trying to do things. So the divisions were everywhere, and the power playing going on behind the scenes was pretty remarkable as well.
I was always of the mindset that let's stay and go down swinging, because I can't remember the figure. I think they were offering 100 million or 70 million or whatever it was. And a lot of people got blinded by that, saying, well, if we take all the millions of dollars, we're laughing, we're set for life. But my thought was, we're not set for life. The Gold Coast Kangaroos are set for life. As soon as the day that we actually pack up and hop in the car and drive up there's no more North Melbourne, we're dead. It's gone, we're gone.
Unique to North Melbourne was a complicated shareholding structure. In 2007, it remained the only club in the league not owned by its members. President of North Melbourne for 12 years from 1980, entrepreneur, innovator and high flyer, Bob Ansett left an indelible mark on the club.
We came up with this scheme of floating North Melbourne as a public company. We went to the public with an offer of $3 million $1 shares.
By floating it through the Hobart Exchange, Ansett was able to raise $3 million, which wiped North's $1 million debt, which guaranteed the club's immediate future.
I think 300,000 shares were sold to members, but that left 2,700,000 that was still sitting open. So I set up a group of companies and appointed directors of those companies, and they bought the shares. So in effect, I was controlling it. Not that I wanted them, but I was just going to hold them until we could find buyers for them. But I was a personal guarantee for it, for the whole thing.
How did that make you feel?
Look, I was a pretty confident guy at that time, and I figured that, we can handle anything, and it's for the future of North Melbourne, and whatever it takes, baby. And
But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Soon after the shares were distributed, the stock market crashed, and Ansett's tricontinental organisation went under.
Shares just dropped to, practically nothing. My guarantee on those shares were called up. The banks wanted me to repay I think at that stage it was about $2.7 million.
2 parcels were sold and the other 8 were up for grabs from Tricontinental. So they knew I was around and they knew I cared and wanted to help the club. Well, I never ever anticipated getting my money back. It was never sort of an investment. It was really sort of having a say in the future of North Melbourne.
So why is all this relevant to the Gold Coast relocation situation? Because 20 years after buying the shares in 1987, the shareholders still controlled the club in 2007. The AFL knew this, and after failing to sway Glenn Archer, made another bold move and turned their attention to the shareholders.
Demetriou, being the man that he was and the legal people he had around him, felt that was the way in. Get to the shareholders, you'll get to the club, you'll get the club to the Gold Coast.
So we all voted against it and officially told Demetriou that we weren't interested. And then that's when the AFL started, one by one, trying to influence people.
I think he felt he was going to get his way, like he did with pretty much everything else.
The AFL realised that they can't do it without Peter DeRusha and my support. We had over 50% of the voting shares, and and we weren't going to give it to them.
And I saw it instantly as the death of North Melbourne. I mean,
if you sold those shares, would you have felt like you betrayed them?
absolutely. Betrayed the club. I mean, the club would still go up there by name, but betray the supporters who I think had faith in the board and its administration. So I think they'd feel that they were sold out.
With Demetriou and Ansett refusing to buy into the AFL's plan, Demetriou attempted to freeze them out and met with other shareholders. If he couldn't go through them, he'd go around them.
The AFL were going off and meeting with North Melbourne shareholders without talking to the North Melbourne board.
It wasn't like a real covert operation, let's get enough shares so that we force other shareholders. I don't recall that to be the case.
I mean, the lies and the political influence that the AFL and Mike Fitzpatrick and Andrew Demetriou were bringing to bear were just extraordinary.
The shareholders became very emotional and probably less objective, in fairness to them, and in some ways became obstructionists. And I'm not saying that in a derogatory way. Just for the club to go to another level, I think they felt a sense of ownership in the club that was either going to be their way or the highway. And
I don't know who he made the approach to, but they set up a pretty high-powered meeting at Crown Casino, and it was in one of those rooms just off the Palladium.
One of the other directors that was invited phoned me up and told me about it. And then I just happened to make a phone call to Damien Barrett, who just happened to be there at the same time.
The way we had it told to us at the time was in Andrew's eyes, it was going to be hopefully done on the spot to have the shares handed over, or if not on the spot, within a set period of time from that meeting for the shareholders to relinquish shares to the AFL.
yeah, I remember that meeting. I'm not quite sure why Peter wasn't there. I don't think he was purposely excluded. Well, that was probably the story or the copy.
You knew it was something that they weren't mucking around with, and would have ideally liked to have, released lock, stock and barrel without having the public debate.
They're bullies, so we have evidence of both Andrew and Mike sort of being bullies and just saying this is how you do it, an attack, attack, attack.
While the AFL was busy manoeuvring itself within striking distance of North Melbourne, a power shift of a different kind had been taking place internally at Arden Street.
Great to have your company on this very special night.
In early 2007, club stalwart and legend Ron Joseph had skillfully enticed high-profile media personality James Brayshaw and his brother and former North player Mark to join his ticket to gain 3 seats at the boardroom table when the club's constitution was changed to allow members to run.
Ron is, and always has been, a real hero to the vast majority of the membership base. People knew Ron as a North man through and through. Older members remembered him from the 70s. Players loved him and still love him. He had been a mentor to a number of the senior players through the 90s and still has very strong relationships with a number of them.
Anyone who knows anything about Ronnie Joseph, there's no way we're going to be leaving Melbourne if he had anything to do with it.
I certainly had no intention of going back on the board, but I kept on hearing that it was a fait accompli that we were going to the Gold Coast. There were certainly worrying signs that, the club were in trouble.
After surviving a vote of no confidence earlier in the year, then chairman Graham Duff sensationally resigned, leaving the club rudderless.
If the North Melbourne members knew some of the things that the AFL did and some of the things that the Duff board did in trying to get North Melbourne out of Arden Street, they would have brought the bloody house down.
With the Kangaroos board at the centre of a major power struggle, many have been urging influential manager Ron Joseph to make his move. Now he has just the ammunition in the form of the Brayshaw brothers, Mark and James.
Ron rang my brother and I and said, look, why don't the 3 of us run? And he made the suggestion that the club needed a media profile and it made sense to get James involved. And I'd long held that view. And so I said, sure, I'll do it. And my initial reaction was, I don't think this is a great idea. And then, my brother, as you know, is pretty persuasive, and he said, look, let me just come round and, we'll have a chat about it. Which he did, and came around with Ron to the back of my place, and we just sat on the sort of outdoor setting. And after about half an hour of them explaining why it was necessary for a member's ticket to get up, given what was happening, I just sort of said, stuff it, why not do it? So that wasn't really a lot of thought went into it, to be honest. I've been a director for 5-6 months. Before I started smelling something was up, I was like, something's going on here. I'm not comfortable with a bit of what's happening.
While at the time it didn't seem so significant, eventually having the Brayshaws involved proved to be a masterstroke.
I thought that was going to be significant in terms of starting one by one to turn the board around. He's a bloke who can give us a chance, but I said he doesn't have a hope in hell if we don't put the shareholding back into the hands of the members.
Pressure continued to build on the Roos as the Gold Coast decision loomed.
I'm certainly looking forward to the pro-Melbourne party putting their best foot forward, and I hope there is a vote. I hope we see by the end of today the future of this great club, because at the moment we're in a bunker and we've got to get out and start punching.
Either way, that James, though, if it was going to go
I hope so.
Either
way, we need to make a decision and get this great club heading forward, because at the moment we're not going anywhere and it's killing us.
According to those at the coalface, the board was split on which way to go for much of the time.
Yeah, of course it is.
It certainly hasn't been portrayed that way lately.
Well, no, it hasn't. No, we had a really good meeting.
Is the board's view that they need to
No, I said all I want to say. I'm going to lunch.
And we were all pretty robust in our opinions. We'd come out of a meeting and we'd charging at each other, and Ron's got to hide like a rhino, so nobody had a problem differing with him. James and I were at each other if ever we needed to be. I mean, it was just that sort of environment. And I certainly was able to challenge him at the board table in a way that no one else could, because, I'm his brother. He and I argued virtually the whole time, but we have our lives, It was quite funny because sometimes, it got pretty loud and pretty personal, which it always does. And I remember looking down the board as we were arguing about something, and the faces of the other directors are like, not really sure you should speak to another director, or certainly I'm not sure you should speak to the chairman like that.
Despite a lengthy meeting, the board was unable to agree, and due to the club's inability to reach a decision, the AFL put its foot down.
The Brews now have just over a fortnight to make the biggest decision in the club's history.
The decision for us is, do we hand in the heritage and the magnificence of the North Melbourne Football Club and the Shinboner spirit and all the things we love about this place, to cash in on an amazing financial offer?
With just 2 weeks to decide the club's fate, several key people began to feel the pinch.
It is an enormous decision. I mean, it's the future of our football club.
It was a pretty daunting sort of thing to start with. And once I got on, I sort of started to realise that, things weren't great.
That year in 2007, it was just, phone calls at 2 o'clock in the morning, make the right decision. Remember, I got some calls about remember who put you there.
People had their opinions around the club and, the North Melbourne family, and it was, you sort of found yourself in the middle of this maelstrom of, where's the club going to be in a year's time? What are we going to do? And to be a director when all that stuff was flying around, I remember was pretty sleep depriving.
It affected my family, it affected a whole lot of things. It affected my business, it affected just things that was all consuming. And football clubs are, because a lot of people support it's their life, and it's their escape. And it was my escape too, right? So it's a club that I was involved with intimately for many, many years before becoming a director.
And the AFL used to come walking around from where they were, and they'd have this entourage of, Gil and Andrew and Katz, and they'd just come sort of swaggering around, and it was sort of surreal, I reckon. If I look back on it now, it was surreal. You'd leave board meetings and there'd be cameramen and journalists all sort of hiding behind cars, and I was thinking, how have I got myself into the middle of all of this? It was pretty sort of weird.
With the affair becoming more public As D-Day edged closer, North members started to rally and make some noise off the back of some favourable media coverage.
North were having a great season, so it should have been a time where the whole club and the support base and the wider football world, I suppose, were rejoicing in it. And instead there was this backdrop of gloom and doom because there was this narrative that had grown as the year progressed that, the only way they could survive was to head up to the Gold Coast. And, the AFL had plenty of willing accomplices in pushing that narrative, I reckon.
The AFL don't come out of this story particularly well. I mean, nor do a lot of people who were working and on the board of the North Melbourne Football Club. The thing that the AFL continued to do is that they did continue to brief against the Kangaroos. When you're in a conversation and it's made clear that, Kangaroos are in a bit of a hole, briefing against people at the club like Brayshaw.
We raised money to do petition cards, and we had literally thousands of cards filled out all through the suburb of North Melbourne. We put posters up and down the streets of Errol Street and all of North Melbourne to have some kind of grassroots. We wanted a grassroots response to say this club's important and it needs to stay here.
As people, really, when you're told you're not big enough, to be told that that's not enough for a lot of people, including myself, was felt insulting at a base. Then, of course, you look and think, well, maybe it is untenable for the footy club to stay here. I just had these dystopian visions of people like myself wandering around clad only in duffel coats, wondering what the hell happened to my footy club.
This is on the verge of flatlining, on the canvas and out for the count. So I would suspect, in fact, I'm very confident, you'll get a great reaction from the North Melbourne people.
As it got to the back end of that year, all I did was sat down with Mark and Ron and just said, look, if we go, we go, but all I want to do is put something to the North Melbourne people that if we stay, I think if we do these things, we can make it work. And then if the decision was to go, well, we go, and you go with like a clear conscience because you've done all you can.
Fans like Sonia Hood and public figures like Aussie rock legend Tim Rogers decided to heed Brayshaw's call and wade in, realising they were on the brink of losing their beloved club, and they weren't alone.
What we'd like, Jared, is to see the AFL come out from behind the shadows and put their cards on the table. We'd like to see the board put their cards on the table and let's debate this.
It's not what the club can do for you, but what you can do for the club. I've always wanted to believe that. The supporters that we wanted to give so much, to do it with humour and with passion. We were trying to be an amplification of some very quiet voices out there who you see every week. Families who really need to go and see the footy club each week, need to go down to training. As any supporter knows, when your club runs onto the ground and you kind of get a bit, you feel a bit displaced and you get a bit giddy and your blood starts bubbling and you start sharpening the vowels and the consonants. I don't scream a lot at the footy anymore because I think I can scare kids.
I think James touched a nerve at the club. He galvanised a lot of people to get off their backsides, got them thinking about what was next and what could be. He put together a very strong narrative about the club and he ran a great campaign.
Rogers also went to great lengths to save the Roos, organising a rock concert under the banner Resistance.
It was alarming how much goodwill there was around because we were deluded. We didn't know the realities of it. James and his bunch knew the reality of it. It was probably pretty bloody grim. And us putting on the gig was a way of saying, you want us to be with you, we're with you. If you remember it, you weren't there.
Dismissing a club directive not to get involved, Glenn Archer and a group of players attended the concert to show their support. Resistance was a stunning success and showed the football world that North supporters weren't going down without an almighty fight.
And we will rally like they have never seen before.
The AFL was far from beaten, however.
It was almost as if they had them on the hook and they were just letting them, tie themselves out before they reeled them in. And Demetriou won't admit that, but I've got a view that that's what they were doing, that the longer they left North in this vulnerable state, they would have no choice but to take the offer that, we are giving you, that you have to go to the Gold Coast because you've got no other choice.
You hand the keys of your club over and that intrinsic, beautiful thing that is the North Melbourne Football Club perhaps doesn't exist anymore.
Brayshaw was working overtime behind the scenes to try and leverage financial support from several high net worth individuals. The capital raising received an overwhelming response, with $8 million pledged in just 2 weeks of searching and $10 million guaranteed by 2009. Brayshaw called the donors the club's White Knights.
I say 48 hours before the North board was to meet, they were typically AFL cocky as we've got our deal. They felt they'd won the battle, that whatever discussions they'd had privately with the board and the power brokers around the board, that it was done, that North Melbourne would be voting to go to the Gold Coast.
I just said, well, we're here to make these decisions. That's why we exist as a board. Why don't we just put it to a vote? That's what you do as a board. Should we stay? Should we go? Anyway, and there was this silence at the board table. It wasn't until that moment that I ever even contemplated being the chairman of the club. I never even thought about it. And it was only when the other three have turned around to me and said, well, you're the chairman. And I said, no, I'm not. I remember vividly saying, hey, that's not what's going to happen. And they said, hey, I'm telling you, you're the chairman.
In the end, it was James Brayshaw. He was the one who took a lot of courage to put his hand up and say, I'm going to front this and we're going to stay in Melbourne. If we died, he was the front man, even though it wasn't going to be all his fault. There's a lot of people behind him, including myself and all that, but he was the one who was going to cop it. I wasn't going to do it. I didn't know how to run a club or be a president, or we're very lucky to have him and his brother Mark. And they are two peas in a pod. Even though James was the front man, but Mark was behind him.
I didn't ever see a football club president in him. I'm not sure he saw that in himself when it's all said and done.
I thought we needed a fresh, young, new image that James presented. I thought he would be terrific.
There was all this discussion about, should we take this offer, should we not take this offer? And the talk, quite understandably, was going around in circles, And I just remember thinking, well, we can talk about this for the next 5 years. We just got to bring it to a head, So I, through the chairman, said, well, I think we should just vote on it.
We basically did a vote around the boardroom table, and it just happened that it started on my left, and then it went around the table, and then by the time it got to me again, it was 3-3. It still is an honour to this day that we had a chance to be part of the history of the club to stay in Melbourne, and yeah, probably one of the proudest moments, the happiest moments of my life. Once I'd said we're staying, the pressure was off.
The people who wanted to go quite rightly and honourably said, well, I can't remain as a director because it's my view that the club should move. So I went, geez, that's good, because I want the club to stay in Melbourne, but I remember thinking, wow, that's a good start. Looking back on it, it was a pivotal moment, but at the time, it just made sense to vote.
And although the shareholders still had the power to challenge the decision, it proved to be a definitive moment in North's 150-year history.
Two and a half thousand of the Kangaroos faithful turned out for the historic meeting, expecting to hear both sides of the Gold Coast story.
I tell you, they've lost me if they go north.
We're here to stay, you'll never get rid of us.
And how often does David beat Goliath? Well, in footy terms, hardly ever. But
that Dallas Brooks Hall thing was happening that night, and so I sort of had a view that we can't, I didn't know there'd be 3,500 people there, but I thought however many turn up, we can't go there without a definitive answer, because they deserve better than that. The amazing North Melbourne people, they're all coming to a gathering of the family, if you like, and I just had a view that one way or another we've got to go into that room with a definitive answer.
Today the board voted to reject the AFL's offer to relocate to the Gold Coast.
When James got on stage and announced, that the board had made its decision and we were staying, that place was extraordinary. The feeling in that hall was extraordinary.
We need to join up and we need to turn up. Our membership's low, our attendance is low. It shouldn't be. We've got a wonderful team to support. We're going to have to stand on our own 2 feet in this city, and I'm sick of being on welfare. I'm sick of being on AFL handouts.
That's one of the more euphoric moments of my life. I mean, people went nuts. It was like the second coming. People went crazy.
If James Brayshaw was doubtful of which way to go, once you went to that meeting, he had to go with the fact that North staying, because the passion from the members, would definitely have influenced him, to stay in Melbourne. So
I think they're just magnificent North Melbourne people that were rallying because they didn't want to lose their club. At North Melbourne, people are wonderful, unique, and they just didn't want to see their club not exist, and neither did I.
While the North fans celebrated, the news didn't go down so well at league headquarters.
I won't say they were popping champagne corks, but they were preparing for that evening or that very next day to be going and launching North Melbourne on the Gold Coast.
Andrew and Mike Fitzpatrick were fuming. I went and saw Andrew, I went and saw Mike. And funnily enough, Andrew was a bit more measured, and Mike at the time, I went and saw him in his office in the city and he was not happy. Their desired result was for us to move. So quite understandably, they're going to do everything they can to make that happen. I get where they were coming from. I was coming from the total opposite direction, so we didn't see eye to eye.
Clearly they hadn't done their numbers properly, or clearly someone turned, and there's been talk about who that person may or may not have been.
It was frustrating at the time. I think at one stage a couple of the guys were driving the bus up to the Gold Coast. That's how supportive they were of the move.
I have it on authority that the AFL were shitty with me because they felt as though I was going to vote to go. So in balancing it all, I looked closely and I was favourably disposed towards going north.
They came and they put their presentation to us, and a lot of that presentation was around, this mythical amount of money.
But there was one key thing which they couldn't satisfy and ended up being a bullet that the Gold Coast Suns just dodged, and that is, of all the modelling we did, they couldn't resolve the question of what rent we were going to have to pay on the ground.
We looked at it, I remember looking at it thinking, you can't guarantee that stadium. That's a huge part of making this work financially, and it's not there.
And Andrew was absolutely convinced he had Mark on board, and I think Mark was on board. And then, of course, at the death knell or late in the piece, he switched camps and came around to James, his brother's way of thinking.
This stadium you keep talking about, you haven't actually got it, and you can't guarantee it. So none of these numbers will work if you haven't got the stadium.
The only thing I remember at the time being a bit bemused about someone changing their vote, someone who was driving the bus to the Gold Coast suddenly was going in reverse down the highway.
I remember a year or two later having a conversation about Mark Brayshaw with Andrew, and Andrew wasn't bagging him as a person, but I remember him saying he didn't have to go with family. It's not blood we're talking about. I mean, it was really quite Shakespearean. The Brayshaw switch, driving the bus and then getting off it and heading back down towards Melbourne, absolutely floored the AFL, floored them.
In the wake of North's rejection, the AFL began to regroup and moved on to Plan B, and issued a 17th licence for a team to be based on the Gold Coast. North's decision, though, opened the door for stinging criticism.
The circuit breaker for us was the fact that the AFL didn't have a stadium deal in place, and quite frankly, I don't know how they expected us to agree to a relocation without our home being fully funded.
I think politically James was right to run that argument because it wasn't a lock back then. I think we were pretty confident that it was going to happen. So he ran that argument, and that's why it created a bit of uncertainty. And we were always confident that that deal was going to come off.
It would have been a massive undertaking for the North people at the time to leave Melbourne, to go to the Gold Coast with no guarantee of a stadium.
Very quickly, the tide had turned in North's favour, and it seemed the club may have in fact dodged more than one bullet by staying put.
The $100 million was a furphy, and there were so many other aspects of it that just didn't stack up.
The maths never really added up to me, to be honest.
There were some very rubbery and loose terms around what concessions would be given to the club should they go to the Gold Coast when it came to players.
It's always good to have a nice big round number. So if you totaled what the stadium was going to bring, if you totaled what the package which had eradication of debt and money going into the bank, you could easily get to the 100 million. It's easier to get to 100 than get to 105.
So in your mind it was the right?
I'm pretty sure it was the right number.
Good evening. The global financial crisis is affecting financial markets right around the world, including Australia. More than 25 banks around the world have failed or have been bailed out. Share markets around the world have suffered large losses. And the reality is, in recent days, we have entered a new and damaging stage in the global financial crisis.
Brayshaw's saviours, the so-called White Knights, withdrew their offers to loan millions of dollars to the club in the wake of uncertain times in a financial sense globally.
The GFC hit, everyone got absolutely smashed, and the money wasn't there.
When the GFC hit, the whole White Knight share idea, it hadn't been established yet, and thank God, because if it had, we would have spent the next 10 years just trying to get people their money back, because the share price index dissolved overnight, and it took the best part of a decade just to get back to where it was.
Compounding matters was the perception that the AFL was actively trying to make things harder for North as payback for its refusal to relocate, an allegation the AFL flatly denies.
And as we know, when Andrew Demetriou gets spurned, it's not an easy task to then go and ask him for help.
What's that phrase about poking the bear? I mean, they definitely poked the bear, and the bear, I felt in various ways, bit back. I mean, my memory is North weren't given the friendliest of fixtures for quite a while.
Look, I've heard, seriously, I've heard over the years, and I'm not there anymore, so it doesn't matter, and I don't think it would have changed under Gill. I've heard over the years that the AFL, if you don't follow the AFL's way, there'll be retribution, it'll be in the fixture, it'll be in whatever else. I've never been involved in a conversation where anyone ever sat down and said, right, these guys have been bad guys, let's give them a bad draw. It just never happened. It's just one of those myths that gathers momentum over the years, and the myth becomes greater.
They were, I think, quite understandably sitting back going, let's see if this smartass is actually able to do what he says he can do. I mean, and that's a natural thing to think. This bloke jumped up and changed the course of it all. So, we'll just sort of sit back and see if he's capable of doing anything that he said he's going to do.
There wasn't one conversation that, once the decision was made, that involved any retribution in North Melbourne. In fact, the conversations were the opposite. And that was, now the decision's been made, we all move on, we've got to move forward. We quickly set about rebuilding trust and relationships with people, because during those times people start to doubt whether you're being genuine or whatever. I met with James when he became the chairman, talked about what needed to be done to move forward, and that was the same from everybody at the AFL, from the management, the commission down right through to all the staff.
Was there a sense that the AFL was going to back you down?
Yes, unquestionably. I mean,
it's all rubbish. It's a passionate game. It's fantastic. And there's always, every year that someone, the AFL, it's payback or conspiracy or fixture, it's all rubbish.
If there was a honeymoon period for Brayshaw, it was a short one.
The Commission did not like James Brayshaw. They did not like his manner. They didn't like his style. They didn't believe in his vision. And I don't think that they were sort of helpful at all to the cause of North Melbourne.
Underneath Mike and Andrew were two blokes in Gill and Katz who were both, they thought we were stupid. Don't get me wrong. They said, you've got no idea what you're doing. You've cocked this up deluxe, and that's how they were.
Scepticism's the wrong word, but I think that people thought that he'd bitten off a lot, and to deliver on the vision that he'd set, it was going to require a whole series of things to come off.
The aces Brayshaw had up his sleeve were gone, but he had a secret weapon that few knew about, and still don't to this very day. Looking for allies, Ron Joseph reached out to one man he knew would never let the club die. One of Australia's most successful businessmen and a lifelong North supporter, Peter Scanlon.
There was a lot of emotion though around that time, wasn't there?
Absolutely, and it was an emotional decision. The risk was we were staying here and could be non-existent, or you could go and be something else and carry part of the tradition.
Brayshaw liked him. He was the sort of bloke that Brayshaw would take to. And so if James Brayshaw had made the conclusion, well, I won't have a bar of Joseph, at least he'd made the conclusion that he'd go with Peter Scanlon.
As soon as Pete threw his weight behind what we were doing, I always knew we'd be all right. Because, I mean, he's just a towering intellect for a start and an extraordinarily powerful man.
And Peter has been probably one of the best things that's ever happened to our footy club. And talk about being behind the scenes, I hardly ever see Peter. Hardly ever spoke to Pete. But he's always there. He's always been there to chip in, him and his family. Obviously been very successful in business and wealthy and all that sort of stuff, but he was as passionate as anyone about staying in Melbourne.
Membership hit a new record off the back of widespread support for the relocation rejection, and sponsors, like North's long-term partner, Mazda, recommitted, which provided the club some financial stability and breathing room. North needed more money and support, but also strong leadership, and set out to find someone that could help the club get off its knees at the ground level. Former lawyer and then Chief Operations Officer at Collingwood, Eugene Arocca, was approached by the Brayshaws.
I think Eugene's at the time was the right guy at the time. I mean, he came from a pretty good background at Collingwood, having worked under, Greg Swan, who'd learnt the trade. He was well connected.
Arocca took some convincing, but soon enough he started to see that the North Melbourne Football Club was a special place to be.
The street fighter bit is true, but the heart on the sleeve bit is what I remember most about Eugene. And he just he just fell in love with the football club and what they were trying to do.
He worked with a passion that was, I believe, really seen in football, and he had a real point to prove to so many people.
But he just passionately worked, night and day.
He quickly grew to love the club in conversations I had with him, and he did a lot of positive things.
I didn't think it was going to be as hard as it ended up being, but they obviously knew more than I did.
Arocca's first task was to convince the shareholders to hand back their shares and give the club back to the members.
That was one of the pillars of getting him to be our CEO, is he said, well, I'm not going to do it if the shareholding issue isn't resolved. I always thought it was going to be very tough to unravel that because it was such a convoluted thing.
I got cautioned about realising that it was going to be a tough job and that, I'd be mediating, if anything, some of the issues that would come up because of these two diametrically opposed camps who'd been fighting each other, and there was clearly blood on the wall.
With DeRouche, John McGowan and Bob Ansett over the line, Arocca had to convince the other shareholders to follow suit.
Look, it would have been worth a bit of money, but I couldn't even hazard a guess on it. And I never even thought about it.
There was clearly angst that these guys only 7 months or 8 months earlier had $3 million, or at least a group of them, part of them, had $3 million on offer, dollar for dollar. And that had disappeared. And personally, I got the feeling that some of them might have been waiting for us to get back into trouble, for the AFL to come back in, re-offer the money and take control of the club. It's not business, it's an emotional element involved too. People didn't want to give up their shares unless they were confident that they were going to see North Melbourne move on. And that applied to the shareholders.
With the shareholders holding firm, Arocca and the club moved on to another big project, something that had been in the making for more than 2 decades. A new facility.
I'd started to get some traction on the facility, and I had some positive talks with government, and I was sort of talking to the shareholders, we'll build this. And when we build this, we're going to turn the corner. It's going to be a real turning point for us, this facility. Staying in North Melbourne, putting down bricks and mortar. Importantly, the club just seemed to roll on some good news, like Mazda. But we met at least once or twice with the groups of shareholders, and Cam Vale and I, and JB, did full strategic plan presentations. We said, we're going to get this facility built. We've been talking to government. We think the AFL is going to help us out. And I think that sort of turned him around a little bit.
No, I don't know how he did it, and he somehow did, because they were fractured as well. They were fractured within their own little ranks because of what had happened, and yet somehow he managed to wrench control out of them.
In the end, the deal was done on the basis that the shareholders relinquished their shares and for no financial recognition at all.
They were wonderful. They handed their shares back. You could argue they weren't worth anything anyway, but they also pledged, if you like, their support to the board, and they said, we'll allow you to have, I think it was 2 or 3 years of no elections and all the rest of it, so you can have the time to get your board to do what you say you're going to do.
We went ahead and decided we were going to build it. Sort of.
The global financial crisis.
GFC hit.
The world had collapsed.
The GFC hit.
I then went back to the board and said, here's our builder. They said, hang on, we're not sure that the global financial crisis is going to be, is over. Don't build yet, let's wait until the new year. And I said, well, you know, we need to go. In fact, there was even some discussion about not building at all for at least another 12 months. And I'd said, we're going to lose the funding. We've got to build this thing, and we lose our members. We'll lose faith.
Temporary fencing was erected, and showing a boldness North had become famous for, the build went ahead.
Now we've just walked past what will be the basketball stadium. So there'll be a basketball stadium on that concrete slab. As I said, we took the view that engaging the community through education, numeracy, literacy, healthy living and lifestyle with the players' involvement will be a fantastic way for us to reconnect to this community.
You go from that facility to this facility, and it's just keeping up with everyone else, I think. And you know, we're talking about being professional athletes and things like that. Now we're going to a professional environment, so it's going to help us out, you know, to no ends.
In 2010, following decades of scrap plans and numerous blueprints, North's $15 million facility was finally opened. And now it stands as a testament to the collective fight North people have showed against much bigger opposition, something the club has always been famous for.
If I think back to where we were and I think to where we are now, it's a wonderful thing, and as I said, a great credit to the people who, you know, come here every day and roll their sleeves up and get their hands dirty.
What's happened since, you know, has been extraordinary.
You know, North will probably never get the credit. It's always punched above its weight, North Melbourne. If you look at the whole of that period of time, they've done a great job.
And it is an extraordinary place to be part of, and the story is completely undersold.
As a football lover, I'm so glad even a so-called perceived sort of smaller Victorian club like North Melbourne, for them to stand up the way they did, that's the great story. It's a brilliant story.
There's always been a stage in the club's history where someone's about to push us off the cliff, but somehow always found a way of digging deep and surviving.
I know that the AFL look at us and say to other clubs, you know, North Melbourne's earning low revenue and is profitable and is reducing its debt and doesn't rely on poker machine revenue.
I do feel proud about it because I met lifelong friends around that time. Some of them who were real nutbags, and a couple of very important people that we've lost as well who are extraordinarily dear to us. And I think anyone involved in it feels like, you know, oh yeah, we did do something.
It really does have a great influence on your life, and North Melbourne in particular, because it's been a club that has struggled from the day it joined the league in 1925. It's got 100 years coming up, and just magnificent.
Yeah, I think it's part of the club's culture to fight, and we had our backs against the wall millions of times.
Whilst it has had to fight and it's had to keep its people together, that's probably been the most important thing. It's probably one of the reasons why it's been such a great club. That
no one can dispute that staying in Melbourne proved to be the right decision, and a club was preserved, and it's a club that I think has a pretty healthy future on and off the field.
I think everyone from resistance, you know, right through to the current administration, should feel proud about what's been achieved at North Melbourne, and I think it's pretty special.
But in the end, it's heart that makes football different, isn't it? And that's the thing that's got to matter.
You know, you look around, you see beautiful oval, the buildings that are leading edge, I mean, our training facilities, the role that what the club plays in the in the community. It's just right, dream come true.
It was a great year, and it was an extraordinary privilege to be involved in fighting for something that you love. And actually, I think we take a lot of things for granted in our lives, and yeah, love my footy club.
To have all of that uncertainty gone, you know, are we going to be around in 15 years? Are we going to even exist as a club? Are we, you know, going to be a part of this competition? Which was really real, you know, in the early 2000s, there was a real chance that there wasn't going to be a North Melbourne footy club. There's no chance that there won't be a North Melbourne footy club now, and that is what I love.